Thank you for joining today's webinar on controlling access to your data and services. Today's webinar is hosted by Safetica, a signatory of the Cybersecurity Tech Accord and European data loss prevention software vendor. Last year, the Tech Accord announced a new partnership with the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise to strengthen cyber capacity building through the exchange of best practices. To further our commitment under that umbrella, we launched a series of webinars to help increase the understanding of key cybersecurity topics, such as the one you will hear today. Today's webinar is presented by Matej Zachar, Chief Security Officer at Safetica, where he oversees internal security and data protection for companies of all types. We welcome you to share questions using the chat box located on the right side of your screen, as there will be time at the end of the presentation to address questions. And now I'll turn the floor over to you, Matej.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and I would like to welcome you as well on today's webinar, which is going to cover, from my perspective, very important and very interesting topic, which is protecting and controlling access to your data and services and protecting them. As my colleague Michelle mentioned, my position is Chief Security Officer here in Safetica Technologies. I'm actually based in Czech Republic, usually in Prague, currently in Brno, which is the second largest city. And I'm responsible for internal security, for strategic projects that we do with our clients. And I've been in the industry for around 8 years now. So that would be my background. For what we are actually doing as Safetica Technologies, just to give you a brief overview from start, we are a Central European company, originally founded in 2007. Right now we have offices in Prague, which is our HQ, Brno, Czech Republic, which is R&D center. It's kind of a Silicon Valley of Czech Republic, so they say. And then in the United States, in Charlotte, North Carolina. Currently, we protect around 200,000 devices around the world. We cover over 95 countries worldwide through our distribution networks, and also through our partnerships with vendors such as Microsoft, ESET, or Fortinet. And currently, we are in a very high growth rate, over 100% growth in customers year over year. So as I'm the number I'm presenting today is going to be obsolete very soon. So yeah, so that would be basically it. But more importantly, what are we going to cover today? We are going to cover some definitions, some important information of what is sensitive data, how and why should you protect it. A little bit more about why is going to be covered in the section about data breaches, where I would like to share with you some interesting examples and some interesting stories behind data breaches and data incidents that happened in the past years. I'm going to briefly mention also government initiatives and how are they going to change the cyberspace. How are they already changing the cyberspace in terms of regulations and also in programs and initiatives that are already there and that can really influence the way how we act and how the cybersecurity is done in the cyberspace, both ways in terms of strengthening and also weakening the security. The last section is going to be about protecting the data in cyberspace. So I would like to cover just the most important topics and patterns I would definitely recommend to follow when you want to protect your data and when you protect yourself in cyberspace. So we are going to go through security behavior, how you should behave, some technologies you might be considering using, and also the last part is going to be about securing organizations and especially firms and companies worldwide, because this is going to being more and more important topic these days. Okay, so let me start from beginning. We in Safetica, and especially me in my career, I'm focusing on data security from for a couple of years now. And what I really want to share with you is how to just like take a look on how you just describe or find out some data is sensitive or should be protected. It could be actually anything. Just think about industrial design plans. Think about any know-how, any strategic data that you might have, either in a company or as an individual. Anything that basically has any value to you is considered sensitive data. Is any data that can basically harm, organization and yourself in case there is going to be some data incident, some data breach, whether it's deliberate action such as external attacker or hacker or cracker or whoever that might be, that is going to be wanting to get your data, potentially find them out for industrial espionage or selling them on a black market or misusing them in any other way. Or it can be basically your employee, your friend, your colleague, and even yourself that can make harm to the data. And such things actually happen quite often, especially when you consider that any of us makes mistakes. And especially in cases like you want to share, when you want to share the data and when you want to use them in some means, there are definitely many options how you can just make a mistake and send the data, I don't know, to a wrong email address or to unsecured place where it's going to be visible for other people, or even share them with somebody who may potentially harm you when he or she knows such information. Especially important are personal information, which is a concept that is very well established in legislations of different countries, especially when it comes to Europe and countries like Australia, Canada. But there are more and more countries actually following, slowly adapting these principles throughout the world, whether it's in Latin America or Africa or Asia. And that is a concept of personal data and sensitive personal data, which is basically, in a nutshell, anything that can identify an individual. There is slightly different approach for protecting the data and protecting the personal information. In fact, in the United States, where there is personally identifiable information, which is a definition used by National Institute of Standardization and Technology in the United States. And also there are different types of or subtypes of personally identifiable information or personal data, which are then governed by different regulations, such as HIPAA and HIPAA compliance, which governs basically protected health information. But there are going to be more regulations that I'm going to mention later in the sections that are going to follow. So basically, just for you to understand, these are the data that describe you, that describe your behavior, that describe your attributes. It might be your address, it might be your email address, it might be your name, it might be your title or your employment history. But it can be also something that you don't really see or understand, maybe from the first perspective. And that is even your behavior in computers and in terms of cyberspace, and when you access some internet website or when you do some action with computer, such as share some information with somebody else or run an application or access any service that is out there. There are going to be some logs. There are going to be some supportive information that these services or applications collect, and these are all going to be considered personal data. Because if you think about it, it's basically everything that describes you. And especially nowadays, when we share lots of data in cyberspace, whether it's in social media or just basically this secondary information, these bits of information that remain there after you access any website or any application, is something that might be potentially misused. Because there might be situations where you are accessing something you don't really want other people know that you are accessing, or there are some actions that you're doing and you think they are private, but they are really not, because there is some service or some attacker, or even misconfigured server on the internet that collects all this information, and then they can be exposed, they can be misused, and it will mean you harm. So for me, to be a little bit more specific, I've chosen bits from stories that are they're actually publicly available. I used a couple of examples from Great Britain, but also from companies that are all around the world, and had some issues in the past with data security. So first, very nice example of human error or a mistake which may cause a huge harm to individuals is actually incident that happened in 2016, or it was late 2015 actually. 2016 is the time when this incident was exposed and published, because the NHS Trust for Chelsea and Westminster, basically healthcare organization, was fined, and it was fined by £180,000 for disclosing email addresses of 700 HIV positive patients. And how this happened was quite curious, because it's something that any of us can basically relate to, and it's something that if you don't really think about this data being very sensitive, it might not even occur to you that this may make like such a huge harm as it did for these affected patients. What happened was that an employee switched hidden copy, so BCC and CC with normal copy with CC field of email, and he just sent an email with all the patient names and the email addresses in a copy when he wanted to send a newsletter. What happened was that all these lists of email addresses was shared with some people, and the people affected, the people essentially that were HIV positive, were subject to harassment, disrespect. Some of them needed to change their identity because they were affected by loss of employment. And some people, because of that, were forced to relocate, because suddenly an information that they are HIV positive was made. I'm not saying completely public, but definitely shared to people who are not supposed to know this information. So if you imagine that you would be one of these people subject of this breach, you can definitely see that this can be a huge issue, especially when it comes to sharing such sensitive data as healthcare information, or health information about health and diagnoses and basically anything that affects an individual in these terms. There are all sorts of sensitive personal data. As I mentioned, in Europe, it's quite well established term or word or wording that we use, and it's sensitive data that basically explains anything that is more than important to protect, because it relates to some information about your health, some information about your religion, or some other sensitive information, for example, about your sex or sex life, or other, let's say, private data. There are many more breaches that are out there in the media. I bet that you've seen some of these logos and heard some of these stories, how companies, huge companies such as EQUIFAX or Yahoo or Under Armour, Target, eBay, Marriott, got hacked or got basically information that they were supposed to held, and they held about their customers, that they leaked to general public. Usually, it was a case of some emails and passwords, which then gained access to their services. So you could just log in as a user of being somebody else, look at their history on their account, even maybe browse their emails. I'm sorry. And these incidents actually happen quite often, and there is a saying in security that everybody's either being was hacked or just doesn't know about it. So it's really true. And what we see in companies which are not as huge as these ones, which usually get to the media, is that any company, any even small company, can be affected by breach. There was huge number of companies affected by ransomware or malware in the past years, and in these terms, data security is really something you should focus on. And there are other webinar series actually in this awareness series that you can watch. They are going to go into a little bit more detail on how to protect against these incidents. So following up with data breach that was caused actually by a problem in process, which is other huge category of issues that we usually see, especially in companies, but you can also relate to them as an individual person, is not knowing the right process or the right way how to either share the data or how to work with data that is considered sensitive. So what we could see, for example, in Heathrow Airport in London in 2018 was an incident that happened because some data was shared on unencrypted USB stick. It was just a regular flash drive that one of the employees or users of the service or of the company was using. And the amount of data actually about the individuals were not, the number is not that high as 50 individuals, but these data really contain very important and very sensitive data about these individuals, and even internal data about Heathrow Airport, which could actually lead to their exposure could lead to some problems in physical security, because they contain some internal materials, some internal results from testing, and because of that, the Heathrow Airport was fined £120,000 for failing to secure this personal data. When they further investigated this incident, or what was the cause of this trouble, they found out that only 2% of 6,500 employees of Heathrow Airport have been trained in data protection. So basically, some of the employees just used the USB stick and he just downloaded the data because he wanted to share it with somebody, or maybe he wanted to work from home. Nobody knows. But definitely he did it, and it was because he didn't just know any other way, or it just didn't come into his mind that this is sensitive data that he should not be just sharing on unencrypted drive. He could lose, or that can be stolen. This is actually something that we see very often in companies, and especially in companies that are even smaller than such a huge enterprise as Heathrow. They usually struggle with external devices and with cloud services when it comes to securing them, and when it comes to describing their employees and training their users on how they should share the data. This is usually huge trouble, and I would say 95% of cases where we arrive to a company that has not been solving this issue before, we find out that these devices are routinely used for sharing personal data or sharing any sensitive data they have. And when you take just the statistics of the USB sticks or mobile devices or any unencrypted media that gets stolen or lost every year. This is a huge issue, which can happen to anybody in the world, basically. The last breach I wanted to share with you is an example of deliberate attempt to harm a company or to basically misuse the data. And it was one of the employees actually of Bupang Insurance Services Limited, which is also a British company. And this company was also fined by over 170,000 pounds by Information Commissioner's Office for failing to secure customers' personal information. And it was because of the fact that one of the employees with the access, with legitimate access to the data, just downloaded these records, and there were records in their internal CRM system, and he sent them to his personal email, where he just ended up offering them later on the dark web. We've seen similar incidents before. This is an event where usually people misuse this data for their own good and for monetarization purposes, because I'm not sure how many of you know, but pieces of personal information such as names, addresses, and even more interesting things like credit card information or some maybe signatures of some people, they can be very easily sold and later misused for financial fraud, for impersonation, and this can cause actually many a lot of harm and a huge trouble for the affected individual, who suddenly just ends up paying a loan that was taken by somebody else on his name, or gets to the trouble with law enforcement because under his name there was some deliberate action, such as accessing some inappropriate content, or communicating with some individuals. And actually, this case was dealt under DPA, which was Data Protection Act, which is a little bit older law that is now that is GDPR, which is active now. GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and this is actually a law or regulation that is currently active in the European Union. And this law actually makes the companies protect their data under the fines up to 4% of their annual turnover as a fine. That is the highest fine that can be given, or 20 million euros. So the fine might have been even higher, and it is very important for companies these days to secure the personal data, especially when you deal with sensitive data and with data as described here. So just to sum this up, the most frequent causes of data leaks that I've seen are basically human error. Then there is usually an external attacker wanting to get them. There are some problems in processes and that might cause trouble, such as untrained employees, etc. And there are also disgruntled employees or users just really wanting to do harm to other people by monetizing this information and selling them either to competition or on dark web or wherever, just to gain monetary effect or monetary income. So there are also government initiatives. Some of them are, as I already mentioned, they try to kind of regulate or enforce strong data protection requirements. I've already mentioned GDPR, that is active or enforced within the European Union. In the United States, I mentioned HIPAA, so that's a law that governs protection of protected health information. There are some laws regulating electronic corporate records or customers' private data, and others, such as Sarbanes-Oxley Act or GLBA. And there are definitely some country-specific or industry-specific standards, either standards or regulations, that basically companies are forced to follow or they're required to follow under some fines for non-compliance. So the situation is slightly improving, but just to give you my idea is that these regulatory actions are usually a couple of years behind of what we see that is happening in technology and that is happening on the internet. And even though we have some regulations and some laws now, some of them already might be outdated because of services that are recently being used and the internet in the state as we know now. There are also some conflicts between the concepts of privacy and law enforcement in general, especially in some countries. I'm sure that you've heard or read some stories about governments unlocking phones, computers, so companies requiring like exporting software requiring code reviews and even code escrow, which basically means holding the source code or its copy on the servers of some foreign country. And some governments even go as far as to discussions about forcing backdoors or forcing the weakening of cryptography or the security of the tools and the security of the algorithms that are used within the software and within the hardware, just for them to be able to trace criminals, to trace terrorism, and eventually, while this might be a good cause, this also causes a lot of trouble for us regular users of the internet or of the services that are there, because essentially if the government wants to have a backdoor somewhere or weak cryptography in some product, it essentially causes weak software algorithm, and essentially makes also bad guys being able to access this information or access these backdoor. And apart from the government, you never know who else is going to get the access to your data. So because of that, there are many initiatives, luckily, there to protect the user privacy. So as you are right now attending the webinar organized by Cybersecurity Technologies, this is one of them. As my colleague Michelle already mentioned in the beginning, there was also a Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace, which was basically called by President Emmanuel Macron of France, and it calls an action to basically protect the data and protect the users of the internet by protecting them against the cyber attacks, and also by these initiatives for lowering the security standards or lowering the cryptography or technologies that we are using in our products. So, what is the conclusion? How to protect the data, really? If there are such huge issues and there is such a huge problem in terms of data, in terms of securing the information that we consider sensitive, how do we protect them? I would say that the most logical way would be to follow the data breaches and what would be the most frequent causes of data leak, to focus on those that are the most important first. It might be something else for different companies, for different verticals, for different people, for different users of the internet, but just in order that I see as important, because it kind of comes down to what I see in practice or what I've seen in companies that really handle sensitive data and handle and really want to protect against these incidents. Usually, you need to focus on human error. Human error can be basically prevented by the right awareness that you would be spreading out. There is never too little information to share, especially when it comes to the correct behavior on the internet. The unknown services you shouldn't use. The amount of data that you share with different services or different websites. It's also about what it comes down to, very practical things on the unknown attachments that are in the email you shouldn't click on. on the on the urgencies or messages wanting or requiring you to send some of your login information or even personal data to people or organizations you don't know, you should definitely be aware that there are many attempts from many external attackers wanting to get your data, and this is something you should definitely focus on and be aware that such people are there, and just basically have this in your mind when you work in cyberspace, when you work with computers on a daily basis, and have this somewhere in the back of your mind, and just just think that anybody out there can want the access to your data. Then to have some sort of responsibility as well, because it's not just your data, but it's also the data of the company itself. As I already mentioned, there are many different types of data that need to be protected, whether it's for some certain regulation, whether it's credit card information, whether it's health information. Everything needs to be protected. And this sense of responsibility is, from my perspective, very important to have, because if you make a mistake, the company can be a target, and the company can be actually fined for not being able to secure the data and for not having the right awareness program, right responsibility in place to for it not to happen. Then, of course, there are some right tools that might help you out. There are technologies that actually spread the awareness. There are technologies that help you train employees. There are platforms where you can just send phishing campaigns, basically, sending fake emails on which you see whether people react or not. And also then technologies such as data loss prevention, where that's one of them that is out there for organizations, which is able to protect the data and enforce some certain paths to be used. And if you are going to, for example, send an email and you misclick, and apart from sending the data to an email address which is inside of your domain or inside of your organization, you would send it to Gmail account, which is, or like any other open account which is of somebody's private address. The technology itself would warn you that this is something you shouldn't be doing. There are also definitely many ways how to protect against external attackers. One thing is technologies. There are definitely many out there, whether it's endpoint security platforms, antiviruses, firewalls, IDS, IPS. Whether you are a company or individual, there might be some of these technologies you would want to take a look on. But it's basically it gets down to the point one. As I already mentioned, the external attackers usually get to your environment by you not having the right pattern of behavior, because you just open doors for them. And in this case, there are many ways how they can get to your data and cause you a lot of trouble. Yeah, the next thing is definitely solving process problems. As I already mentioned, these are very, very frequent in organizations, and to solve them, you definitely need the right tools to work securely, whether it gets down to protecting or encrypting your external devices. As I already mentioned, this is one huge issue in many organizations, or using some encrypted means of transferring data, whether it's any protected cloud drive that is out there for organizations from any vendors. There are definitely many technologies out there that may help you protect the data and share them securely with somebody else. Then it gets down to awareness and education as well, as I already mentioned, to enforcement of the rules. There are tools out there that help you audit what is happening with the data and what is whether the data are shared by these secure means, or there is some issue with security. So yeah, I definitely encourage you to look up some of those. if you are looking for solving this issue, and essentially preventing insider threat, which is a combination of all above. Because if you essentially take a look on user behavior as the most crucial aspect of, because we all are people, we make mistakes, and we work with the data on the daily basis. We definitely are the ones that are responsible and the only ones that are able to protect the data, and before data breach, before the incident that might happen. So there are many technologies, as I already mentioned, whether it's endpoint security, whether it's network security, protecting the data at rest and use in transit, encrypting them, using some good means for sharing them, some protected means for sharing them. And when it comes to organizations, it's kind of outside of the scope of this presentation. I'm sorry, but there are definitely more means how to build the entire information security management system and protect the organization as a whole. When it comes whether it comes to technologies, to regulatory compliance, to organizational security, or to physical security, these are all things you should be considering when you protect the organization as a whole and when you want to protect the data inside. With that being said, I would like to thank you for the attention, and thank you for joining us today. I would like to leave some space for questions in this moment. So if you have some, please do not hesitate to ask them via the platform that you should be seeing in front of you. And after the questions, I would definitely thank you for your attention.
What do you see as the most important to teach users when it comes to security behavior?
Yeah, I think, thank you for the question, Michelle. I think the most important is to teach them the basics, is to teach them really the importance of the data they are sharing, they are using, they're having on the computers, and that anything that they own and they regularly share on the internet could be misused, actually. And this is something that I really wanted to stress on this presentation as well, because many people just don't consider their data sensitive or their data important, but it can cause a lot of trouble if they don't. And I think this is the most important thing to teach the users.
In small organizations, there are limited resources to secure the data and meet all these regulatory requirements. So what should they focus on in the first place?
Again, thank you for the question. I think it gets down to really the priorities and making a project plan in the beginning. So I would say that the first of all, how we usually approach organizations is through audit. We usually start with trying to find out what the most crucial incidents and issues of their particular organization are. Whether it's, as I mentioned, external media, or whether it's protection against external attackers, or protection against malware, or whether it's insider threat that is the most crucial for them, and that basically just it gets down to following the priorities. So if you find out that the external media are the highest problem or the highest issue, focus on them and really just try to solve the aspects or the means of sharing the data, or the means in the cyberspace that are the most crucial for the particular organization, and then follow and just expand the security. We have experience, or I have experience with many small organizations which didn't know and didn't have anything in the beginning, and I've seen many organizations actually failing and being taken over by their competitors just because of industrial espionage or by regulatory fines. So I would definitely encourage companies to focus on security and to start with the things that they see that are most important and most frequently happening in their environment. Okay. I do not see any additional questions. So if that's okay, I'm going to end here. And in case you would have some additional questions, there's definitely way to contact Cybersecurity Tech Accord. There is definitely way to contact me. Just type my name the surname at safetica.com. And I would definitely encourage you to just think about the things that are important to you and that they are important for your company, and really just protect the data that you have, or that you consider as sensitive. With that being said, thank you for your attention, and have a great day.